Hey, it's Amir Borman. This is another episode of the Talent Tango podcast. On this week, I have with me Ashley Fejes, and we are going to talk about a few topics ranging from transitioning out of a role to employer branding and the differences between working at big companies, small companies. And she is currently head of recruiting, talent acquisition at SnackNation. Makes me hungry just thinking about it. But thanks for being on, Ashley.
Of course, I probably should have brought some snacks to have like around me.
So definitely appreciate you being on. And where we like to start the podcast always is to get a little origin story from you, kind of how you got into the industry, how you got to your current role, and then we'll kick things off.
Okay, great. Again, Ashley. Oh no, how do I silence that? I'm so sorry. Technology. So I feel like most people I fell into the industry. Like I didn't go to college and say like I'm going to be a recruiter. Didn't even know what recruiting was. So I got picked up by a staffing agency when I was a 10. Um, I'm like I used to tell us all the time when I was on the agency side, I was like the wonder child story where I was a temp turn recruiter. So the same agency that placed me out on two different, or I think it's just one assignment, I ended up interviewing for and getting my first recruiting job.
Nice. And then it just stuck from there. Like you just kind of realized. I mean, I think did you get a sociology degree? Is that where your background was?
Yeah, I got a BS or BA, whatever it was, in sociology from Arizona State. And I thought I wanted to be in HR. I was like, that's where I want to go with the corporate world. I love people. And then I had an HR assistant job, and I love human resources is still obviously like the bigger umbrella. But I realized when I started doing just like the employee benefits and payroll and all of the fun stuff, I realized it just wasn't for me. And so when the recruiter opportunity came up, I fell into the agency side, loved it, loved collecting people. um, Truly what it is.
I like that. I've never. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody referring to as collecting people, but I absolutely. I'm going to nick that. I'm going to use that. That's fantastic.
It's on my tagline on my LinkedIn. Yeah, like it's people collecting, and also it's like a platonic matchmaking in a way. Like I really
Yes.
enjoy that. And so just stuck. I just from there I went in house and I continue to love it. How do I get all these off?
So when you've gone in house, I guess just a curiosity. So you were working for an agency for about a year and a half. What was the biggest like transition point from having to worry about talent acquisition recruiting as a sales activity, and then all of a sudden you've gone in house, and that's doesn't completely go away, but it's a different form.
It's a great question. It's funny because my first in-house role was at a very small fintech startup, and the CEO recognized that I was agency side, and so she actually made my comp plan built out just like an agency recruiter. So I actually got commission off of heads. Um, yeah, I look back on it and I'm like, oh, kind of twisted, but she actually spoke to like what I wanted. So I guess in a sense, it was just like an easy transition. But yeah, I had kind of a rude awakening of realizing, oh, this isn't no longer just quantity. Of course, there's quality in agency recruiting, but generally it's a quantity game. And now I had to look at, I'm solely representing one client, which is the company I work at. And I need to focus way more on passive sourcing and outreach versus like getting an influx of resumes and applicants from all these different requisitions. So I think that transition alone was a little tricky, but I found that I really enjoyed actually being able to tell like a brand story about the company I was at, speaking to the culture, being able to be internal and like tell that internal story to external candidates without having to just assume from whatever honeymoon version of the story that my points of contact at each of these companies was telling me.
Absolutely. So, I guess the interesting thing you touched on there. So, when you talk about culture, like we're an agency here, so I have my own opinions. But when you saw the difference in cultures, like, and obviously not maybe, when you went to Netflix compared to, the agency might be a better. What was the biggest difference in culture when you walk into that? And I see a lot of people transitioning from agency to in-house, and I think that's always probably the biggest difference.
Yeah, I think it's like, yes, it's a difference, and no, it's a difference. And I only say that because I've also been to some boutique agencies that have a really good, just like recruiting culture for those teams. But generally, I came from a larger agency side. And one, just like to know, I'm very much supportive of like anyone that's wanting to get in recruiting, start their agency side. You just get so much foundational structure there. And I'm very thankful for like I guess, springboard to my career that I got from the agency. The culture on the agency side for me, since I was at one of the largest ones, at least in California, is very corporate in a good way. It gave me structure. I really learned what activity will get me to what's appropriate in business partner meetings, what's appropriate client facing. And I mean, those clients that are like your external clients at an agency, it's the same as your clients that are internal at a in-house, where you need to start treating hiring manager relationships the same way. But going into, I mean, my first startup that I went to was crazy because they're just growing so much. We went from, I was around like employee 60 and we got up to, I was there. So it doubled and kind of like expanded very quickly in hypergrowth. And so we had to kind of assimilate to what that meant and how it translate. And then you go over to a culture like Netflix, which at least in the recruiting world, I think most people know what the culture is like over there. I think I've already said it, but shell shock. It's kind of just like you realize you're like, oh, it's very different. And you kind of have to, as a recruiter, you just have to assimilate in general and be able to speak to so many different audiences.
Yep.
But in cultures, I think you have to do the same thing. You have to be ready to be a chameleon.
That makes sense. It's funny. You're not the first person to tell me that if you were to recommend people starting out to start on the agency side because of the I want to choose my words carefully, the training that you receive as an agency recruiter. So what's missing? So, you've been a part of, smaller, bigger in-house teams. When you guys are onboarding, comparing the training you received at an agency versus in-house, what's the gap? What do you think is missing from that in-house training to be able to give that edge back to people coming straight into that in-house scenario?
I think what's missing, or at least in my personal experience,
Sure.
at this, foundationally especially an agency, and when you're at a larger one, they have it ironed out like no other to a T. That's all they do. That's all they do is onboard recruiters. And they have a big corporate structure where you have enough functionality where you can go to someone and it's segmented out. Like I was a full desk recruiter, like they're a full cycle there. And I know some agencies totally different where they split up the business and the recruiting side of the best piece. But I think when you come in, they have such a rigorous onboarding training. And if you look at, for me personally, and I watched it at Netflix, they bring people on specifically for those entry level roles versus stepping them right into a recruiter role. So they bring them, if they're bringing someone on that's never been recruited before, you're a TA coordinator, you're honestly just doing the scheduling or greeting individuals. And it's rarely, even if you have recruiting experience, even if you have minimal a couple years, they still bring you in on the TA one. So they don't have as much of a robust training program because they want to make sure to build you up and have a growth path and trajectory, which I totally respect and understand. It's just a whole different scenario where a lot of agencies are prepared and well equipped to bring those college grads right out of school, get them trained, and they like identify, honestly, similar like what you do for hiring an account executive or sales. They identify those drivers, those soft skills, and then they give you all of those hard tools.
Yep, that makes sense. I think that's. I think internally, I've seen people that have got into there. The screening is not solely for how sales motivated you are. That pure achievement drive. There's various other factors, and I think agencies we're simply looking for the sales huntress mentality. So I think that I agree with you on that one. To kind of pivot into a couple topics that we outlined before, because I know this gets going so fast, the podcast, before time's up. I want to jump into some of the main topics, and I know the one area that you're passionate about, employer branding. Talk to me about what how you define employer branding, how you've seen it at smaller companies, bigger companies, and kind of start the discussion from there.
Yeah. Employer branding is one of those subject matters that a lot of people, unless you've done it or you have exposure to it, they kind of view it as this like fictitious subject matter almost. At least from my run-ins, where I got introduced mainly to the subject and idea of employer branding at Netflix, and I was very grateful for that. We had multiple trainings on the recruiting team and how we could represent the brand and how our brand very much overlaps with the brand, their representation, and we're the gateway to like introducing people to Netflix. And so that was more of like personal branding meshed with employer branding. And obviously Netflix is fairly established. They came out with their culture deck way back when, and whether that hit the right audience or it didn't sit well with others, they still had a brand. Like they say, any news is good news, like press is press. And then you look at some smaller companies like where I'm at currently in SnackNation. When I originally got recruited over here, my VP was saying, hey, we really want to build up our employer brand. We have like a good brand for the actual main SnackNation official brand. But when it comes to attracting top talent, like we know this is where the market's at. And that was a little over 2 years ago. And he was very, very correct and spot on. I think a lot of companies do it well if they focus on authenticity, and you can read through the lines when another company isn't doing so, where they're just pitching core values or pitching their mission, but you don't see it resonate in the content that's coming out or the employee reviews. Employer brand really comes back to, I forget who the quote is, so I'll quote it, and I know it's not, I didn't say this, just to be clear. People believe people, not brands. So employer brand really resonates well in the talent market if it's coming directly from the employees, not even just the recruiters. So that's where I feel like I've seen, one, personally, I think we've done well in succeeding in that, but also I've seen other companies succeed in that as well, as if they leverage their employee base versus just like branding or marketing.
Agreed. Yeah, I think I like what you said in terms of the authenticity, and I think the gap that a lot of times exists is the core values of a company, what somebody has in their mind at the executive level and what's tactically being seen at the employee level. And I think the bigger that gap is, the harder it is to actually tell an employer brand story. I mean, from Netflix, you guys, everything's ironed out. You guys have people, for every little segment. When you guys were introduced to, employer branding, was that something that was brand new to them, or were you already a part of that? Like, was that an existing, concept, or was that brand new when you were there and they were kicking it off?
At Netflix or SnackNation?
At Netflix.
They had already kicked it off. I stepped right in. I joined at a very pivotal time. So they had ironed out a lot of foundational work when it came to telling their story. I joined it in the very beginning of 2016. And if anyone is a fan of Netflix, they usually know Netflix launched globally 2016 January. So they launched all markets all at the same time. And so I think they had a lot of learnings as a business, which was actually very exciting for me to be a part of, just because I feel like I got to witness internally some of the communication that like just the gatherings that happen when you're launching globally, but like when it's specific to recruiting, that really affects your talent story in each market and trying to attract. Because my team in specific there is very verticalized, but we were still hiring. Like I was interviewing people in Sao Paulo, like we were hiring internationally, and we're realizing like the culture that might resonate for the talent population here in the States can be very off-putting to, say, Argentinians. And I think that was probably a wake-up call to some, but there was plenty of conversations where they really enjoyed how candid people were at Netflix and how forward they were with their culture. So it's just interesting to kind of learn that like you have to almost cater, especially when you're a global company like that, to those markets and really leverage without losing like the main core values that the company stand for.
How do you see? So you left the organization that had obviously a whole different global view of employer brand, different geocentric views of it. So when you go to SnackNation, do you walk into SnackNation and you're like, I want to do some of this stuff, and then it's like, well, we like this, but or was that received, employer branding?
I was pleasantly surprised when I was recruited over, and when I went through the interview process, I was like, they already had some branding for how small they were. There was video out. I was like, is your culture really as great as like this employee review video is and all this content that you have? So I was super skeptical. My entire interview process, my president probably would still say this. He was like, you kept poking holes. He's like, do you think we're not like a good place to come to? I almost was off-putting probably in that sense. And a perfect example and little tidbit was in my final interview with my president and COO. He asked me a final question because he did want me to focus on employer brand when I came in. And he's like, what is a unique employer brand strategy you'd like to implement when you come in? And he's like, what would be something like just like off the charts? And I was like, for SnackNation, we should host a 5K, like a community 5K. And he was kind of perplexed by it. And he's like, explain. And I elaborated that really that field marketing is huge nowadays, especially if you're trying to highly like target a place like Los Angeles. And that word of mouth is just huge, referral based. Sure enough, foot and mouth, the following January that I started, my president Ryan was like, congratulations, you're planning the very first SnackNation 5K. Which I think successfully planned and hosted in September of that year. And I've never put on any sort of event, and specifically not a corporate one. And I was the point person. I went to Culver City Hall. I had to do follow-up meetings with like all the different city departments, had to get permits, this whole thing. But moral of the story with that is I very much got to implement a lot of things that I suggested here within reason and budget. And I feel like I'm very grateful that they gave that opportunity just to the company in general to at least tell their story broader, because we've put out continuous content ever since.
Wow, that's really cool, actually, and amazing that he came back to it. So well done on his part or her part.
Word of advice: don't promise anything in an interview you can't deliver.
100%. I tend to. My wife would say that he doesn't say anything unless he knows he's going to do it, because I'm always afraid of somebody, especially my 6-year-old daughter. Very afraid of that. She's like, "Oh, but Daddy, you said." I'm like, "Oh, I gotta commit."
Still remember.
Yeah. So I guess from there, because I guess a lot of people talk about employer branding, then it comes, especially smaller companies, about budget. Do you have budget? Was it excuse me? Was it something approved? Is it per maybe initiative for employer branding? Talk about maybe how budgeting happens for those type of initiatives.
Budgeting. I feel like that's always a subject matter, especially at a growing company. I have dealt with that in previous startups, and specifically here, like even compensation comes back to budgeting. With employer brand, I've been fortunate to have some really strong leaders here that see the value in that without me even having to really twist their arms or pitch them or over pitch them. Just bringing back like always tying out ROI to whatever I'm suggesting or pitching, or whether it's my VP pitching it, attaching whatever the ROI would be. It could easily be like just engagement. It could be shares. Like it can come back to honestly just social strategy. I think that I continuously try to find better ways to track, because tracking is important. I know in recruiting, there's so many metrics and KPIs that you can go off of. But when it comes to employer branding, it's difficult because you can't just say, this video that we put out, like we just created a video called Pup Nation about the office dogs here. This video caused someone to click through to the account executive posting. Now we hire them. You can't really track that. You can say that they interacted with that video and you can track those analytics. But when it comes to coming back to our company and being like, or this piece of content that we want to do externally, I've always just gone back to, this is the amount of engagement we've gotten off of pieces of content, because truly that does still foster someone down the funnel to hire.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I saw an email out from a recruiting marketing company. I won't mention a name, but part of their link was to follow about 7 tips for better recruitment. And one of it was to use text messaging. And the thought in the text messaging was to use a platform to send a message to tell people that a role is open. And I was like, that's not marketing. You're still selling. Like selling is you're talking about my need. My need is I need you to click on the job so I can hire you. And I think what's interesting that you brought up are the metrics and how it is very difficult to see the funnel and actually attribute the dollar back. Like from the 5K, was there any objectives that you guys were trying to establish? Like, you ran it, which obviously is a feat of itself. So congrats for that. But like, was it just like, hey, let's just try and see what happens? Was there any real objectives of let's see what numbers we're getting from community response or reviews or et cetera?
I was lucky that I gave a good amount of pushback throughout the process, because it's like, we need a budget for this. I started like moving around and I was like, we got fortunate because what we do here is we work with a bunch of brands. So I was like, okay, we'll make this work. Give us upfront money. I will get sponsors. They will get branding. We will try to break even somewhere. So we came to a conclusion probably 3 months into planning, where I finally said, I was like, okay, would you be comfortable with hitting this amount of like, I guess, sponsorship and, calling it a loss on this chunk of the funding? And then I also said, I was like, the ROI would be, or like, I guess what we'd measure as success is like the amount of runners that came out. Because that's not going to it's not going to translate to hires.
Yeah.
That means it's that amount of engagement. We got over 2,000 runners, and
Wow.
and we're a company of 130 employees.
Yeah. That's cool. Good for you. That's an awesome event. Like 2,000 people that come running us. Yeah, you should. I put that in the top of my resume.
It was truly a village that was involved. I was just a point person, but
Yeah.
it was an amazing experience. Now I can truly put that on my resume, which I don't know if it necessarily fosters like a TA skill set, but it
Yeah.
was eye opening.
Yeah. And I look at it that way. That investment, the 2,000 runners, that's going to equate to, I don't know, maybe 10x social exposure, like just the amount of just direct. And then from that, I'm sure there's a multiplier. Somebody will know the brand. And I always argue when somebody goes on to job aggregating boards like Indeed or LinkedIn and they're scrolling down, they may not know SnackNation. Like it may not be the name between the Snapchats and the Facebooks and the Amazons that stands out, but maybe a photo, maybe something lends them to go, oh, I saw this. That was interesting. Let me click on their job. How do you measure that? I have no idea how that's going to be done because I think on e-commerce, they're very dialed into measuring those top of funnel and how the drip campaigns work. And I don't know if recruiting, I think we're the Stone Ages still, but
We
someday.
are. We're getting there.
Yeah, slowly. But that's a cool story. I mean, I love the 2,000 runners. I thought you were going to say 200 when you start with two. I'm like, that was really good. And then you said 2,000. I'm like, gosh, dang.
I was honestly amazed. Day I was like, wow, we really got that out. And it's just the idea that even out of those 2,000, if like 20 of them, just 20 said like, we just ran this like 5K that was put on by this local company, SnackNation. They said it to their roommate and their roommate's on the market, or they shared the snacks because we made it interactive. We had like a whole expo after with our brand partners and made it set up like a farmer's market. So there was so much cross exposure to these other brands too, which was also great because we always want to continue to like cross-functionally build up our brand partners. It just, that type of exposure is something you can't really put too much of like a KPI or ROI on, I guess.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you guys, speaking about reviews, I always like to ask about Glassdoor because it just depends. I'm just curious. What are your views? I mean, are you guys active with Glassdoor? Is it helping? Is it hurting?
I think of the best way to respond to this. I've been at so many companies that have different views on Glassdoor. Actually, I think everyone has the same view, but just executes differently. Personally, here at Snack Nation, we definitely keep an eye on it. I try to remind people in general, Glassdoor is like Yelp. You go there if you're really, really happy or if you're really, really disappointed, which is fair. And that's what it's supposed to be about. I've always, in a previous role at a previous company, I didn't suggest that we were trying to just respond to everything because that can also come up unauthentic. We monitor it, we address if there's truly like a reoccurring theme. And then we also are just mindful that some people definitely want to voice their opinion. That's totally fine if they weren't comfortable during like an exit interview or with their manager. Like we just acknowledge that it's a tool and a technology. I luckily, like full transparency, I don't have a lot of candidates bring it up. I've had like less than 5% of my career here.
Nice. Nice.
So I'm lucky in that sense.
That is good. We see all kinds where we say it's like a 2.6 and we're like, hey guys, you guys know this is going to come up. Like this is like the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So
No one wants to talk about, but you try to avoid. You're like, no.
yeah, you bob and weave. You're like, they're going to bring it up. So where else are you guys in terms of like just, recruiting strategy in terms of trying to source, job adverts? Like, what are you guys strictly on LinkedIn? Are you seeing other avenues? Because I know you also hire salespeople. Like, where is LinkedIn your number one tool? Or you guys see other boards or other avenues that really help?
Yeah, I just did a training on LinkedIn yesterday, actually. LinkedIn is like just the end all because everyone's on it. I treat it as a sourcing tool and not a communication tool. So I reference it for identifying people being able to review, but I honestly do my best to go outside of LinkedIn to talk to people. The other tools that we're using when it comes to like sourcing or just finding candidates, we use Hired on the tech side, which is just like a very, very like, they're very active candidates and that platform's nice in that sense. I truly, going back to employer branding, I truly stand behind Built In. They're a great tool, especially when you want to merge sourcing and recruiting with employer brand because you get all those content pieces. And I don't know if this is me just being sensitive to it, but when I talk to people day in and day out, and also I'm in the application about us or where did you find us? And I always ask, like, how are we talking today? More and more, I'm hearing people say, like, oh, I found you on Built in Chicago. We have a Chicago office. Or I found you on Built in LA. And those are some of the, honestly, like when it comes to active applicants, those are some of the highest quality candidates I've had.
Interesting. Yeah, and like I'm a firm believer. I propose that career sites should go away on websites because nobody goes to them. I don't see the traffic. I actually think every company like SnackNation or even bigger should literally have their own version of built-in on their website. That should be all they have because the jobs, I mean, people, you guys are hiring for whoever, but the engagement, that content. But you guys, I guess, like in terms of the Muse, like have you guys dabbled with the Muse, or you felt like built-in was more like local, geo-local, more specific targeted for you guys?
Yeah, I dabbled in the Muse at my first startup. We looked at both built-in and the Muse, and we ended up going with built-in, not because the Muse wasn't good at the time, and this was years ago, like 2015 actually, or 16. Um, at the time, the Muse didn't have a sourcing feature or a back end where the recruiter could leverage the people on the platform. And so the Muse was strictly content. I have a feeling that might have changed. I have no idea because I haven't explored recently. That was honestly why we ended up going with built-in. But
Cool. Yeah, no, it's a good tool. Yeah, we actually come across it a lot when you're researching companies, and we actually glean a lot of information from it. So I see it as a interesting product as well. Um, so I know we've been talking about employer branding. I did want to cover the one other area that we had kind of fleshed out. So I know you mentioned before that you're leaving Snack Nation, that you're going to Snap, which is good. Continue the journey. And since we were talking about the transition, and obviously, I come from an engineering background. I mentioned when you're leaving, you try to tidy up your code to as clean the level possible, hand it off to somebody, and go, it's now for you to finish or deal with. Yeah, congrats. Here's my commenting if you're really nice and did a good job with all that stuff. How are you transitioning? So this is like, a good pivot. They know you're leaving. What's happening behind the scenes to help with that transition? You're pretty pivotal right now at Snap in terms of a Snack Nation employer brand. You hold a lot of, I guess, of details in your mind.
yeah, I again in that same training yesterday with leadership, I realized how much of my role is a value here. We're hiring a bunch for how large we are. And I, like you just covered, I'm not only just a recruiter, I'm a recruiting manager. I'm also an employer, like I'm a marketer. I'm the marketer on the HR side of the business. So looking at transitions, I one always try to give like the most amount of time. So this time, like I'm given 3 weeks, and I've started like building out my transition plan as soon as I get that notice, and like doing my very best to prepare everyone as much as possible. So we did an in-depth leadership training yesterday where I had all the department heads and managers at the company in a room, and I was like, "This is everything I do in a very short 30-minute window. If we want more information on any of these sections, I'll sit down with each one of you or all together." Like I just very much opened myself up. I was like, "Please, whatever you want to mine off of me, you can." I give kudos to my previous VP because she also built into, we're very goal centric here. We're one, a startup, but two, sales at our core. So we have goals on a quarterly basis. And one of our goals in the beginning of the year was to build out specifically for the HR and TA team, to build out our SOPs. So standard operating procedures in like a huge, like, I guess, Bible of a document. So I'm very fortunate that I'm set up for success because I just continue to build off of that. So there's a huge running Google Doc that would probably give most people anxiety with a bunch of hyperlinks of everything, every process when it comes to how we hire and recruit and attract talent at SnackNation. So I think moving forward, it's all about preparing and empowering everyone else. Like I'm going to say this probably for the 60th time on this call. I'm very fortunate for the leadership here because our executive team very much empowers. Even before my transition, they've empowered the teams. Like you are just as much of a recruiter as our recruiting team and as our like TA management team. So you are just as responsible. If they're out reaching out to people, you should be reaching out to 2 times that amount of people. So throughout my time here, I've done a lot of trainings on Boolean searches. I put on what's called Recruit Palooza. Like I've empowered the teams to have all these skills that most recruiters already have. Which in a way, I think some recruiters I've shared with, they get almost like territorial. Like, why would you give them your skill set? Like that's what makes you valuable. But on the flip side, I think it makes me more valuable if I'm empowering them and adding to their resume. And if they want to become a recruiter and replace me on my role, fine, so be it. But I think knowledge sharing and just making sure to set everyone up for as much success as possible, like that's my entire until my last.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually think that's phenomenal. That the same sentiments exist outside of HR. People are always like, don't hire an engineer smarter than you. They'll take your job, like the old school thinking. And I'm like, and my first manager said, I want to hire the smartest people to take my job, which means I can go do something else. And I think you actually nailed it on the head. If you have people that are freeing you up to do other high value skill activities, then that means you've executed really well. So good for you. Um, so in terms of I just want to touch on the Google Doc, the standard. So in terms of kind of that living document, when you're looking at that and you're handing it off, what do you think the next person's going to do when they get that? Like obviously you had your own thoughts when you got it, you built off of it, and now you're hoping that you're going to pass that off. Then what are your hopes for that document? Are you hoping they're going to just hold to it, chop it up? Like what do you think's going to happen?
I thought about this. I've actually had a nightmare about this. Um, I'm I don't want to say type A. That's like not a good description. I'm very organized and very much like driven on like success of the company and my role. And I implemented our ATS here. So I implemented Lever. So Lever's like my baby. And I've been having like anxiety around. I'm like, what's going to happen to the ATS without me here? Like it's going to go haywire. No one's going to keep track and cleaning. And the same with this document. I created this document. This document wasn't here before I
Oh, so
joined.
it was all you then? Okay, it is your baby then.
It's my baby. My VP definitely like was like, "This is a goal of yours," which I'm very grateful for. I don't think I would come up with that on my own, but that doc's like my baby. So I've been fortunate to have support that I was able to implement a lot of the processes here. Like a lot of them, there was some process when I before I came here, they had a recruiter, but I very much leveraged and like elevated what we were doing. So my not concern, my like unrealistic fear is that someone will come in, the next individual is going to be amazing and continue to elevate Snack Nation, might want to like demolish everything. It's unrealistic fear that I've dreamt about. And I hope that I've empowered everyone else, like my hiring managers, where they're very used to like they know our process to a T. The docs more so like just so they can go to backup and know like, hey, what did Ashley do in the step behind the scenes? And I think they're all very comfortable with this process a lot. Like I don't get any I guess negative feedback on the process. I'm hoping that everyone continues to put this person in check. And I have faith that we will find the best recruiter out there for this next person. And I will also probably send them a little bit of like LinkedIn passive threats of like, you better not be demolished. Just because I'm so invested in this company. But
That's awesome. That is super cool. And yeah, I mean that's amazing. I'm glad you shared that. And I mean I think the fact that you produced it and there's something that can be referenced, I think that's a step ahead of a lot of organizations, to be honest with you. So good for you. What are you gonna do at Snap? I guess just tell us like what's your role gonna be? What are you gonna be recruiting for? What do you think?
yeah, I'm very excited. I am going over and joining Snap on the business side of recruiting. So they have three different verticals: tech, business, and then almost like just a GA focus. So I'll be hiring for all revenue generating like teams here in LA at the headquarters, but also focusing on some international recruiting too, which was extremely appealing to me because outside of the recruiting world, I am extreme traveler and just I always have a travel bug and have always found a way to get out of this country. So I'm excited to continue to expand my skill set when it comes to TA of attracting talent in all these different markets. Like we'll be hiring in Mumbai, hiring in Singapore, Sydney, all over in Europe as well. So I think me joining the team over there, I'm stepping into a role that's in headquarters here, but on my vertical of recruiting, I'm the only recruiter in headquarters. The rest of my recruiting team's in New York. So I'll be on a team where I'm supported and continue to get developed, but also I get to be kind of a one-man show in some capacity, just in the sense of like being able to have a lot of hiring manager relationships, which I also find like extremely appealing.
Nice. That's gonna be fun. I think I've talked to a few talent acquisition directors, and the international piece is definitely is a challenge, but I think there's a lot of upside in terms of learning about. Well, I mean, I guess you did a lot of that at Netflix. You guys were rolling out to global, anyways. But um,
To continue doing it, I think.
absolutely. So I mentioned two questions I'd like to ask. So you've been doing this for a while, and I'd like to think that people can always learn from each other, especially if somebody's starting out, or if you could look back hindsight and you're like, I wish somebody would have had a little advice for me. So what kind of advice would you share with people, whether they're in the job or just starting out, whichever one you want to talk to? But any advice in terms of you wish somebody would have told you when you started out?
Yeah, I think back to like the agency side. When I was just learning what recruiting was, I was like, this is a whole industry, let alone like a role. Um, I would say that I've learned over the years, and what I've recently shared is always be curious. And I know it sounds simple, but in the sense of trying to learn as much as you can about everything, or being a knowledge source, if you will, and having a little bit in every area and every field, because that will be instrumental to continuously like being a chameleon in your role and being able to adapt to the conversations you're having, the industries you're working in. Continuous curiosity just shows like one, a level of engagement, whether your audience is a hiring manager, whether it's a candidate, and also like a level of being transparent recruiters that, yes, agency side, but even in-house, that start to get so salesy and focus on just like attracting talent, saying the right things, trying to get them in the door and through the process to hit quotas or whatever it may be. I've learned over the years that yes, sales is a key function of recruiting, whether we like to say it or not. We are like sales individuals. But I've gotten personal feedback from candidates, and I tell this to young recruiters: be transparent and candid. They will respect you so much more on those calls. I like lead with that as much as possible. And there's still a way to do that in a like a courting manner, but transparency and having like a level of just being like empathetic with candidates when talking to them and realizing like, hey, this role might not be for you, or that you might not actually be interested in this role. Instead of being like, no, no, you should still go through the interview process. No, no, like this is still like very attractive, though it's maybe a 10K step down of where you're at.
Very interesting. Yep, I like that. I like the transparency part. That resonates with me a lot. I think I agree. Um, I could tell you because yeah, when I was being recruited, that was my number one pet peeve. So that's a hot button. And yeah, yeah, they
Why
were.
would you? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. You know what? There's all. I've learned this. There's different kinds of salespeople in every single industry. It doesn't matter. So I don't think it's personal to recruiting. It can happen in a real estate or cars or whatever. Um, and then for my selfish reason, I mentioned I'm asking about a productivity hack because I'm a productivity geek. I like to figure out how to get more efficient myself. So anything that you have to share on that, I'm curious to hear now.
Yeah. I also want to like go back and watch every episode you've ever published. So and now that I know this question's at the end of it, because I want to
It's just recent. It's been I think only 2 or 3, so I'll have to tell you which ones to listen to.
I'll
But
go back.
yeah, now it's because I realized that. Sorry, just as a side, I realized that I was it came up off screen, off air in a previous one. I was like, why didn't I ask the person because it was so good? And then I was like, we got to ask. So, anyways, now it's just been a couple, but yeah, I'll let you know which ones.
It'll keep me hooked and I'll keep
There you
watching.
go.
My hack is learned from a previous manager, but I continue to do it now. And I don't know if I'll be able to bring this to my next role, just like as a caveat, but it very much works in my current state. And it's been instrumental just keeping me organized. Um, there's a name and a method to it. So I don't know, and I'm not going to quote it. Setting up an hour if you can, even if it's a half an hour, but an hour at the end of your week, where you go into, like for me it's a conference room, but anywhere where you're away from your desk where you're naturally working with your computer, downloading. I have this timer on my desktop and setting either the hour or half an hour, do a 30-minute block, and don't do anything with social or anything, and just work. And then at that 30-minute break you take a 5-minute break and do like online shopping, go on BuzzFeed, whatever it may be, and then jump back on for another 30 minutes if you can do the full hour. But I remove all like distractions, and I also just remove my access to my phone, because my phone's with me the rest of the day. We're recruiters, we're always on our phones. I think almost more than some other like occupations. And but for me, if I can fully remove myself from it and also get out of like where I'm comfortable, I get all my weekly planning for the next week done every time.
Very nice. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that I think I've listened. I keep saying I read and I don't read. I listen to Audible, so I feel like I cheat when I say read. But I've been listening to. I listened to this book, Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he mentioned something similar that if you can create like a trigger. And you can delay the gratification once you get it. The 5 minutes of BuzzFeed shopping that creates a habit of being able to do that. So you've probably done a really good job of kind of building that as a trigger point for yourself.
Because then I know I'm going to have this quick like mind break. So I think I just work towards that. I'm also very competitive. So for me, I'm like, okay, I cannot like I'll focus on everything. And I've been doing an hour segments where I have that 5-minute break in the middle. So I get 25, 25 or whatever it may be. And generally, I get my weekly planning and everything else, like even candidate follow up, all done in that hour. And it's just 1 hour on my Friday.
Nice. I like that. I took notes on that because I'm gonna give it a try myself.
But that break is instrumental. It gives your brain just like, I don't know what it does. There's obviously psychology behind it.
Yeah. No, there's a Brandon Sly. He was on a couple of weeks ago. He mentioned as a company they set up a no meeting Wednesday, and no meetings can be booked at all the whole day, even interviews, unless it's something extraordinary. Interviews can't even be booked that day, and I thought that was kind of
That's
crazy.
all.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know how you manage that, but they figured it out. But I like the fact that I can do an hour. An hour definitely something I can manage a whole day. That'd be really hard for me to probably be disciplined to.
We have focus days here on Wednesday, which is funny that you say that. Like our Wednesdays, our leadership and like I even practice it is focus days where like everyone's work from home, but I still get booked up with stuff. But it's nice to have that placeholder. We ignore it now, though, so
That's funny.
it's kind of working.
Awesome, awesome. So I appreciate Ashley. Thanks for being on. I think this was like the time flew by, and I was like, I want to be cognizant, but I love talking employer branding. You have some super unique insights. We definitely wish you the best in terms of the transition. Obviously, you're going to leave Snack Nation in the best state, and hopefully continued success at Snap. If someone wants to reach out, are you comfortable somebody reaching out on LinkedIn, or are there any other avenues that you prefer somebody reaching out to you by?
Yeah, I'm so accessible on LinkedIn. Sometimes I'm too accessible. But yeah, that and I can probably find me on any other social. I'm kind of like an open book. I'm just there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, yeah, I'll get some of those links to include in the show notes. So if somebody wants to reach out, they can. Again, I appreciate you being on. And for anyone who's listened, please give us some feedback. I'm always looking for questions, like areas, topics of interest. And I think we like to get the feedback to improve the podcast. So please let me know how things are going from your standpoint. And we will be back next week with another guest. Thank you.